and I'm your host on Inside Vietnam. Hello everyone and welcome back to the show. My name is Phi Nguyen and I'm your host on Inside Vietnam. Today we're taking you out of the studio and into the executive boardroom of the New World Hotel Saigon for a special episode on strategic entry into the youth segment of Vietnam. Asian youth aged under 20 makes up roughly about 35% of the total Asian population and 15% of the world's population. Needless to say, this is a significant market segment for manufacturers and marketers. While Vietnam ranks 6th in Asia's youth population, what does it mean in terms of strategic entry into this potential segment? Should companies adopt a global or regional marketing and communication strategy, or should companies design a separate strategy for Vietnam? Let's have an in-depth discussion today with our panel of 3 guest speakers. Mr. Martin Gu, General Manager Indochina of Coca-Cola, Mr. Ralph Mathes, Regional Managing Director of TNS, and Ms. Phương Linh Nguyen, Research Manager of TNS True. How do you keep your message consistent though, from trying and self-expression and then going back and paying homage to your parents?
We got very good research.
Well, that's actually a very good question. I would just simply say that, remember, people are not just one thing. You know, people's needs, their identity. A perfect example, you know, if I go to the office, I dress a certain way. If I go to a nightclub, I dress a certain way. We are different people all at the same time. And it is very much about that self-expression. Part of that self-expression is being the good son, the good daughter. On the other part, it could be, I'm finding out who I am. And that's still the same person.
Among other things, because contrary to a lot of other youth cultures in the world, for Vietnamese, actually being a good student and being considered a good son is actually a source of pride among friends.
Yep.
It's not. It is actually highly esteemed among friends, whereas there is no concept of the geek or the nerd in some of. It's actually not pejorative. Is that the right English word? It's not a downer for your friends if you're actually a very good student and an obedient son. So
it's actually adding value to who you are.
Adding value to.
What about generation gap? Is there a big generation gap in Asia and in Vietnam?
I think generation gap is still there. Like their parents mostly don't know how to use computers, laptops, don't get on social network sites, that kind of thing. Even their older brother, which is like can be 20 years older than them, things like that. Because of the influence and the family stick so close together, I think the generation gap is not like...
It's not pronounced. Okay, a good example though is, from a couple focus groups we did up in Hanoi recently, a girl said, you know, my parents won't let me go out dressed like this. So I don't know, she was wearing tight pants or short top or whatever else. So what she does is she packs a bag, her friend picks her up, and she goes over to her friend's house, changes, then goes out, comes back home, changes again to her regular and goes home. So there is a little bit of deception, which is very much about what generation gap is about. You know, it's about deception because you're trying to get away with something that your parents may not agree with.
So who do they talk to then, if there's such a gap? Do they have people to talk to?
They still talk
to their parents?
The parents very much so.
They talk to their parents?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And parents still have a very strong influence over daily lives of their kids.
Do parents have any influence on their brand choice?
Yes, but less so every day, I would say.
The parents and the young people here like still have the same kind of exposure to the development of the brands here. So I mean, like, of course there are certain brands that the young people would choose and the parents wouldn't agree to, but I don't think that's gonna be like...
Yeah, it's not a big thing. I think the other thing you have to remember is parents dote on their children here. So if the child is happier because you buy brand X over brand Y, more than likely they'll do it unless there's financial constraints that don't allow that. So parents are very willing and off, what kind of cookies or this or that. When it comes to a health platform, though, the parents still sort of rule the roost of this is what you're going to have.
What about money? Because these are emerging markets. Is money very important to them?
Yeah.
Money is important all the time for anyone. But how important is money to the youth?
Just the 12 to 19-year-olds here are responsible for close to $4.5 billion of the economy. That's kind of shocking. $4.5 billion of the economy. So it's about 5%.
I mean, the teenagers, we know from the true studies that they have like certain amount of money that they got mostly from their parents. The thing is that the new trend nowadays that they borrow the money from their friends as well. And that's why when we ask, like, you know, there's a kind of amazing high, percentage of, teenagers in debt. And in debt, not with the bank, but like their friends and like even their brothers or sisters. So that's the way like they deal with it. And I mean, that may be leading to like they really aspire to making a lot of money.
So success means making a lot of money.
Yeah. And what's ironic that, for example, Indonesia, which is in a way poorer than Vietnam in terms of living standard, there it's even higher. When you look in the States where people are wealthy, only 45% of you say that it's really important. So it really comes down to how much money and access you have to money, I think. So again, it's more of the developed versus non-developed countries. I think you see a change there.
What's your experience with that, Martin? Success means money.
When you have a lot of kids that are really their first urban generation of in their families, you know, their families may have arrived here to the main cities 10 years ago, and they're really the first one. So the generational gap that we were discussing earlier is also translating into the need to have money, because when you're in the village, you probably have less opportunities of spending. When you become urban, there's a lot more opportunities to spend. So, and that is also where the value, so the relative need to have money among youth becomes higher than that of their parents.
Does that translate into a very high growth for your company in recent years?
For the Thai FMCG industry in many fronts, yeah.
What about other categories in Vietnam? Have you seen other categories growing very fast as well?
Put it this way, I mean, if you take a look at the healthcare sector, for example, you're talking double-digit 20% growth last year. FMCG was 21%. Within that, beverage was over 20%. We were talking before about sort of men's toiletry products like deodorant and whatever else is skyrocketing, well, from 0% to something, you know, cosmetics. The entire FMCG sector is growing fairly well.
You've mentioned before, actually Martin mentioned before that youth in the global context probably share more of the way they communicate than their values and lifestyles. Does that mean that the communication channels across Asia in the youth segment would be very much the same?
I think there's certainly like some very strong similarities there. I think the two key channels is still like television. That's the top, like you can't replace that. You can't replace that. And I mean internet as well.
Is internet the second medium right after TV?
Put it this way, TV, TV is heads and tails above everything else. I'll give you an example. 76% of Vietnamese watch TV daily, okay? 40% read daily, but already using the internet in urban Vietnam will surpass readership this year. So China, for example, almost looks like America does in terms of internet usage and whatever else. It's shockingly surprising. Other countries, like say Thailand, because of Sanskrit, the internet is not as easy as it would be in other markets which use the Romanized language, okay? But Vietnam, now internet is considered the most informative medium, okay, and the most entertaining. Now, if you've watched TV in Vietnam, and I'm sorry guys, but it's not the most high production value entertaining medium out there. And the other thing is, internet is very interactive. So while TV is passive, internet is interactive. In the old days, you'd walk down your hem little street or whatever else, and you'd see the TV on. Today, you see the computer on. So it's changed so subtly. But mind you, we have urban Vietnam and rural Vietnam. Rural Vietnam still really lags far behind. So for rural Vietnam, youth, it's TV and radio, and then print. And internet lags behind because they would have to go to internet cafes where they can access. But in urban Vietnam, internet is already the second most, or will be the second most used medium by the end of this year.
But I think we're forgetting about cell phones, though. I mean, the mobile phones, there are 1.5 times as many mobile phone subscriptions as there are people in Vietnam. So the penetration of mobile phones is universal, I would say.
Yeah.
And that provides another extremely powerful vehicle for communication. Sometimes internet access, for example, may not be done through the computer. People may never actually get to a computer, you know, to access the internet for years because they don't need to anymore. So they have completely leapfrogged this technology stepwise thinking that we had. That we've lived through in the West. It's gone all the way. It's straight from nothing to smartphones.
Yeah.
And
very true.
But I mean, just one thing that we should pay attention to is that TV, of course, they can't live without. It's a top, media channel. But the thing is, the level of trust for TV is still higher than internet. Internet is really, the usage is really catching up fast. But however, like, if we want to really, the brands, if they want to really communicate through this channel, have to be really, have some,
You need to have a media mix, a proper media mix here, which does include outdoor, TV, mobile, as you say, and mobile's coming along very quickly, you know, but it's still taking a while in terms of 3G, 4G, streamlining data, so on and so forth, but that's why the internet has become so prominent. But yeah, it's a media mix, and as Mark, I'm sure will attest, you need to have a number of touch points across the entire market to really be able to benefit.
What are your key touch points towards the youth segment in Vietnam at the moment?
Well, we work a lot on TV and the internet, both. I think those are two our primary. Then for the audiences, we use quite a bit of outdoor and print. But for youth, it's all about TV and the internet. And just to give you an example, some of the I always call it China-size it, because we used to get from our colleagues in China a lot of statistics about, oh, we run this campaign and we got 50,000 uploads of videos and you know 2 million impacts and this and that. Well, some of the work we have done with very strategic partners here in Vietnam on the internet have produced penetration or reach levels that are far beyond those that we would reach with our biggest campaigns in China in terms of proportion of the youth population that we can reach. So it is a very effective medium.